Hello everyone, welcome to the Adkup Show. Today we are diving into one of the most transformative shifts in global politics, the rise of a multipolar world order. If you have been hearing terms like global power shift or the decline of the West in news, you are in the right place. We are going to break down what a multipolar world is, whether we are heading towards one, and what it could mean for you, me, and the planet. So without wasting time, let's get started. So what exactly is a multipolar world? Well, in simple terms, it's a global system where power isn't controlled by just one or two superpowers like we have seen in the past, but is shared among multiple major players. Think of it like a game of chess with several queens on the board, each with their own strategy and influence. Unlike the Cold War, when the US and the Soviet Union dominated, or the post-Cold War era, when the US was the sole superpower, a multipolar world has several power centers. Countries like US, China, India, and Russia, plus regional players like Brazil or ASEAN nations. What makes this system unique? First, no single nation can call all the shots. Second, these powers compete and cooperate, creating a complex web of alliances, rivalries, and partnerships. And third, it's not just about military might. Economic clout, technology, and even culture play a huge roles. Let's unpack this further. To understand a multipolar world, let's look at its defining feature. First, you have got multiple power centers. However, all different power centers will have a different understanding of multipolaris. The US still has the world's strongest military, but China's economic rise, India's growing population and economy, and Russia's growing influence are shifting the balance. Each of these players has their own sphere of influence. Think China in Africa or India in the Indo-Pacific. Second, power is decentralized. No one country can dictate global rules like the US did in 1990s. Smaller nations like Vietnam or South Africa can now band together or align with different big powers to amplify their voices, and they can do that simultaneously with different powers. Third, we are seeing different ideologies. The US promotes liberal democracy, China pushes for state-led capitalism, and countries like Russia or India emphasize sovereignty. This diversity means no single worldview dominates. Fourth, economic interdependence is huge. Global trade, supply chain, and investments tie these powers together, even when they are rivals. For example, China and the US compete fiercely, but their economies are deeply linked. In fact, US and China have the biggest economic relation in the human history. Fifth, regionalism is on the rise. African Union and ASEAN are stepping up, giving smaller nations a bigger say. And finally, alliances are fluid. Countries like India might work with the US on security, but join China and Russia in groups like BRICS for economic cooperations. This mix of competition and cooperation makes a multipolar world very dynamic, but also unpredictable. So are we actually heading this way? Let's find out. The evidence is pretty clear. The world is shifting towards a multipolar order. Let's break it down. First, the rise of new powers is impossible to ignore. China's economy is now the second largest in the world, projected to hit around $20 trillion in 2025, not far behind the US at $26 trillion. Its Belt and Road Initiative is building infrastructure across Asia, Africa, and even parts of Europe, giving Beijing massive influence. However, this influence is fading away as BRI is actually flopping. India is another rising star, but with too many problems. With over 1.4 billion people and an economy on track to be third largest by 2030, India is making waves in tech, space, and diplomacy. It's balancing partnerships with the US through Quad and with Russia and China through BRICS is classic multipolar behavior. The European Union, despite challenges like Brexit, it's a powerhouse in trade, climate policy, and regulations like GDPR. It's pushing for strategic autonomy, meaning it wants to rely less on the US for defense or tech. But to be honest, it looks like future of EU is not really good. They may be a powerhouse, but they don't have coordination and the economy is getting deindustrialized. How this will turn out in the future is yet to be seen. Russia, while economically weaker, punches above its weight with military power, energy exports, and influence in places like Ukraine or Syria. And don't forget, regional players like Brazil, South Africa, or Indonesia who are stepping up through organizations like Mercosur or ASEAN. Second, the US's relative decline is a big factor. Don't get me wrong, the US is still the world's top military and economic power, with over 700 overseas bases and the dollar as a global currency. But the 2008 financial crisis, costly wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and internal divisions have stretched its resources. Meanwhile, China's outpacing it in areas like 5G and critical minerals. Currently, the US is sitting on debt which is over $36 trillion and it's struggling to stabilize it. Third, economic shifts are redistributing power. Asia now accounts for over 50% of global GDP when adjusted for purchasing power, thanks to China, India, and ASEAN. Trade deals like the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership or RCEP are creating new economic networks that don't revolve around the US. Finally, global institutions are under pressure. Countries like India and Brazil are demanding more say in the UN Security Council, while China created alternatives like Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. These trends all point to one thing: power is spreading out. Now, not everyone agrees that we are heading to a multipolar world. Some argue we are still in a unipolar world with the US as a dominant force. They point to America's unmatched military, global financial system, and tech giants like Apple and Google. Others say we are in a bipolar world with just the US and China as the main players and everyone else playing the second fiddle. However, here's why multipolar world makes more sense. The US can't dominate like it used to, and China, while powerful, doesn't have the global reach to replace the US. In fact, no country can reach the level of the US. Meanwhile, players like India, the EU, and even regional blocs are carving out their own space. It's not just a two-horse race anymore, but it might become. We don't really know what's gonna happen in the future. So what does a multipolar world looks like in practice? Picture a world where power is spread across several major players, each with their own strengths. The US will still lead in Americas and NATO, but its influence in Asia and Africa will shrink. China will dominate in Asia and parts of Africa through trade and infrastructure. India will be a swing power, balancing between East and West, while Russia will keep steering the pot with its military and energy clout. Economically, trade will diversify. We'll see more deals like RCEP or BRICS-led initiatives. However, BRICS is now slowly getting downgraded, and the US dollar might face competition from euro, yuan, or even digital currencies. Technologies will be a battleground. Think US versus the Chinese AI or 5G ecosystems, with the EU and India building their own tech stacks. Security-wise, we might see more regional conflicts as powers jostle for influence. But global wars are less likely because everyone would be economically tied together even in a deglobalized world. Climate change and pandemics will force cooperation, but mistrust could make it tricky. And culturally, expect a clash of narrative. Hollywood, Bollywood, and Chinese media will compete for your attention, while different governance models like democracy versus state capitalism vie for legitimacy. It's going to be a vibrant, messy, and competitive world, but the intensity will be low as we are witnessing a global decline. A multipolar world has a big upsides. It means more representations for the global south. Countries like India, Brazil, or Nigeria get a seat at the table. Competition can drive innovation in tech and green energy, and without one hegemon, unilateral interventions might decline. But there are challenges. Rivalries could spark conflicts. Think India-China border tensions or Russia-NATO standoffs. Coordinating on global issues like climate change or AI regulations will be harder with so many players. And fragmentation like competing tech standards or trade blocs could create inefficiencies. By 2035, we could see a world where China's economy rivals the US. India's a top 3 player, and the regional blocs like ASEAN call for more shots. Alliances will be flexible. Countries will team up based on issues, not ideology. It's exciting, but it's not without risks. But don't you think that both the US and China are on decline? Anyways, so there you have it. A world is moving towards a multipolar order, and it's getting to reshape everything from trade to tech to how we solve global problems. Whether this leads to a more equitable world or a chaotic one depends on how these powers play their cards. So what do you think? Will a multipolar world bring more cooperation or more conflict? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and let's get the conversation going. If you found this deep dive helpful, smash that button, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss our next video. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.